Dim the lights. Take a breath. Tonight we're walking into a house with marble floors, a fountain shaped like a sea god throwing up water, and a tiny shrine in the corner where everybody pretends the home is blessed because they offered a raisin. At breakfast, the villa belongs to a Roman who owns people. Question of the night: what couldn't that owner do? It sounds like asking what a toddler can't do with a crayon and a fresh wall. Technically, there are rules. Realistically, chaos. The law said enslaved people were race, a Latin word that basically means thing. Not employee, not tenant, not even person with limited rights, a thing. The same legal bucket as a bench, a jug, or a goat with a personality. From that single brutal fact, the rest of the system grew like ivy on a stone wall, hard to pull off and always spreading. So what did this mean on an ordinary Tuesday? It meant owners could sell you, rent you out, brand you, beat you, chain you, gamble you away in a hot streak, or regift you like a fruit basket nobody wanted. If they needed fast cash, you were collateral. If their nephew needed a tutor, you were good news, because you spoke 2 languages and could quote Homer without moving your lips. It also meant your name didn't really belong to you. Callista, the most beautiful, cute. By the time you'd been sold twice, you might be Spatula because someone thought it was hilarious. Your identity bent around the jokes, needs, and moods of whoever held the deed. But here's the twist. Rome wasn't just a machine of cruelty. It was also a machine of order. The Senate, the courts, the magistrates, these folks loved rules the way some people love lists. And over time, a weird pressure built up. The economy needed enslaved people to live long enough to learn skills, raise children, and be rented out for profit. In short, dead property doesn't earn. That cold calculation began to carve tiny limits into the granite. We'll get to those limits in part 2. For now, the headline is this: any answer to what owners couldn't do is drowned out by the far bigger list of what they could. The law gave enslaved people a paper umbrella. The storm was real life. Let's set the scene tighter. Imagine you're in that villa. You wake before dawn because somebody kicked your foot. You carry water, heat bread, learn which child is sick, which guest snores, which lamp smokes. You slot yourself into a human puzzle called a household, not family estate. The owner is the center. Everyone else orbits. Are there good houses? Some were gentler than others. No constant beatings, proper rations, maybe a head slave who argued for fairer chores. But you don't get to choose. Even a mild owner can snap, and the snap can ruin a life in the time it takes a cup of wine to spill. Could you resist? Maybe in small ways, drag your feet, miscount the cups, pass a message across the alley to someone in the next house. But open resistance was gambling with pain. The state preferred quiet streets. Your survival plan was to avoid becoming a story because stories drew judges, and judges drew punishments. What about love? You could care for someone. You could hold a partner's hand in a storeroom and make promises nobody could hear. Rome even had a word for slave unions, Sundabonium, which sounds like a cough syrup and offered about as much comfort. It wasn't legal marriage. It lived entirely at the owner's mercy. 2 people could share a bed and raise a child, and the next morning one could be sold because an uncle in Sicily needed hands. Love wasn't veto power. Love was a risk. What about skill? That's where Rome's contradictions sharpen. The empire adored Greek culture, so Greek teachers, doctors, and scribes, enslaved or free, were valuable. If you knew numbers or medicine or rhetoric, your owner showed you off like a vase no one else could afford. Sometimes you taught the owner's son to think. Sometimes you fixed the owner's fever. Sometimes you balanced the books so well the estate's profits climbed and you got, not freedom, but slightly better rations and maybe shoes that fit. But skill didn't erase chains. You were the brain the owner rented out to neighbors, the hands that copied books until your fingers cramped. Honor, glory, public office, those belonged to freeborn men in white togas with too much perfume and exactly the right family name. You, no matter how brilliant, were the shadow in the back room, the ghostwriter of someone else's dignetus. This is the rhythm we'll follow all. Series, the letter of the law versus the music of power. The letter sometimes said don't or not without a trial. The music often said do it anyway if you're rich and connected. And yet this is important, Rome did keep nudging little lines into place. You can't kill a valuable worker for nothing. You can't make the whole city look cruel in broad daylight. You can't keep up a private theater of horror if it risks a riot. Those lines were thin and movable, but they exist. And tonight we're chasing them. So here's our thesis in plain words. Owners in Rome could do almost everything, but not absolutely anything, where the state's image, the city's order, and the economy's needs overlapped. The law carved out no, and not like that, and not without paperwork. It wasn't compassion, it was control. Why talk about this now? Because understanding limits, even ugly, inadequate ones, shows you how power protects itself. Rome didn't soften because it grew a conscience. It adjusted because chaos was bad for business. And inside those adjustments, enslaved people found oxygen, a chance to save money, to petition, to hope for manumission, not miracles, margins, but margins matter. A margin is a place to write a plan. By the end of these 12 parts, you'll be able to answer the question with nuance and receipts. Not a clean list, but a map of a cruel system and the thin fences it built to keep itself from collapsing. If that sounds heavy, you're right. If it also sounds necessary, welcome. Dim the lights, let the fan hum, and grab some water. We're going to read the fine print on an empire. Next up, the one limit Rome eventually cared about enough to formalize killing. Not because the victim was a person in the law's eyes, but because death messes with profits, taxes, and public peace. Let's walk into that courtroom and meet bureaucracy's cold version of mercy. Early Rome treated the household like a tiny kingdom, and the paterfamilias, the male head, like a mini Zeus in sandals. If he smashed a vase, no problem. If he smashed a human life he legally owned, same logic, property destroyed, case closed. That's where we begin. So what changed? Not a bolt of moral lightning. Math and politics changed by the high empire. Enslaved people weren't just field labor. They were skilled tutors, accountants, secretaries, barbers, midwives, trained assets the economy leaned on. Killing them randomly wasn't just cruel, it was expensive. And the crowd doesn't love watching an aristocrat turn his home into a private execution ground. Spectacle belongs to the state, not your dining room. Enter the slow roll of limits. Under Emperor Hadrian, yes, wall builder Hadrian, the message sharpened. You can't just execute your own slave on a whim. If you claim he deserved death, the case goes to a magistrate. Translation: the state wants a stamp on your cruelty, or you don't get to do it. It's not mercy, it's jurisdiction. The empire reserves public killing for itself. Then came emperors like Antoninus Pius, who made it clearer: if you kill a slave without cause, you risk being treated like a murderer. Will a rich man always be convicted? Please, this is Rome, but the threat exists, and threats shape behavior. Your neighbors don't want scandal. Your patrons don't want noise. Your lawyer doesn't want to argue he annoyed me in front of a judge, who wants the city calm before the next chariot race. Important cause was elastic. He stole, he attacked, he tried to run. These could be enough. Owners could still be vicious. They just had to perform reason in public. That performance mattered. A public why is a thin rope, but it is a rope something for a clever advocate, a sympathetic magistrate, or a watching crowd to tug on. Why did Rome pick this hill to die on? 3 reasons. Reason 1, money. Think like an owner.
You fool.
Spent years training your Greek tutor to turn your son from a marble statue into a talker. You paid for a midwife to learn difficult deliveries. You invested in a barber steady enough not to nick your jugular. These are assets with ROI. Murder them and you've set fire to your own ledger. The state's view is similar. Dead assets do not get rented, taxed, or inherited. Skilled labor shortages make the elite grumpy. Grumpy elites make politics messy. Reason 2, order. Rome loved public order almost as much as it loved public baths. Random household executions risked crowds, rumors, and riots. The memory of slave uprising Spartacus wasn't a bedtime story haunted the elite. Reducing private spectacles of cruelty was like removing open candles from a theater. Fewer fires. Reason 3, image. The empire sold itself as civilization. You can't brag about roads and aqueducts while prominent households look like horror sets. Requiring a magistrate's nod put a cleanish sheet over ugliness. It said, "We are not barbarians, this is justice." Flimsy, often, effective at calming onlookers, more than zero. Now, let's talk enforcement, because rules without teeth are bedtime stories. Was a poor owner more likely to face real punishment than a senator with friends? Absolutely. Connections lubricated everything from loans to verdicts. But the existence of a rule let someone intervene. A relative could say, "Take it to the magistrate." A neighbor could whisper, "Don't invite disgrace." An enslaved person might hope, "If he kills me, he risks shame." And sometimes that hope slowed a hand. Also, paperwork creates delay. Delay is a survival tool. If a rage cools because a form needs a signature, a life can be spared not because the owner grew kind, but because anger has a short battery and bureaucracy has a long hallway. What about torture? Different track, same cold logic. Rome kept torture as an investigative tool, especially for enslaved people, under the idea that pain squeezes truth. We'll unpack that nightmare in part 7. Here, note the split. Torture is state business. Execution requires state permission. Owners could still maim, beat, and brand. That never went away. But the line at killing became, in theory, a public line. Did people cross it? Of course. Did people get away with crossing it? If wealthy, often. But culture shifts even when power protects itself. A rule gives critics a stick. Philosophers like Seneca scolded cruelty. Crowds grumbled. Moralists wrote. And sometimes the law's threat landed hard. Enough to force a show trial nobody wanted. A quick case study without names. An owner kills a household slave without approval. Neighbors talk. A client seeking favor with a magistrate decides to make noise. The owner suddenly performs grief, invents a cause, blames provocation. The magistrate, wanting peace, fines him heavily or shames him publicly and calls it a day. Is that justice? Not for the dead. But the message spreads, don't. Do it this way. Don't do it loudly. Don't do it now. Owners adjust. Violence goes indoors, behind thicker doors, and the murder line still violated becomes harder to cross with impunity. It's ugly. It's also a limit. So if our core question is what couldn't owners do, here's the first true entry. You can say out loud, they couldn't lawfully execute their enslaved person on a whim, in public, without the state's approval, especially in the mature empire. They could still kill. Impunity wasn't gone. But they now owed Rome a performance, a reason, a process, a nod. That performance sometimes saved lives. Sometimes it only saved Rome's face. Both outcomes mattered to the system. Hold that in your mind as we move to an even more intimate frontier, the body. If death required paperwork, what about everything that comes before? Could an owner force anything short of killing? That takes us into the darkest corridor of all. Consent didn't exist here the way we mean it, and that absence, normal, legal, and devastating, explains more about Rome than any marble monument. If Rome wrote a user manual for enslaved bodies, it would be one line long, use as needed. There were paragraphs after that, sure about labor, discipline, clothing, rations, but on the question of consent, the pages were mostly blank. Not because nobody thought about it, but because the legal imagination of the time didn't recognize enslaved people as owners of their own bodies. In practice, that meant an owner could demand intimate access to an enslaved person without asking permission, without apology, and without fear of being charged for violating a person. If anyone got to sue, it was another owner for damaging property, not harming a human being. The law protected value, not vulnerability. That's the horror. Here's the structure. Roman law treated free citizens and enslaved people differently at every turn. A free person's body was shielded by a web of status and citizenship. An enslaved person's body was submerged under ownership. That ownership crossed lines we, today, treat as sacred. A teenage boy, chosen for his looks, could be dressed as a decoration at dinner. A girl in the laundry room could be pulled aside and told to oblige because a guest smiled at her. No courtroom waited for their story. Were there any off switches? Tiny ones. If someone else's slave was assaulted and came away scarred or pregnant, the injured owner could try to extract penalties for damage. If a master's habits were so theatrical and public that crowds complained, a magistrate might scold him in the name of public morality. Later, as Christianity gained official power, emperors issued vague commands to avoid excess, to keep the household modest, but those were fig leaves on a statue. They hid, they didn't heal. Let's be careful here. It's easy to write this with modern words and miss the ancient logic. Romans were not confused about pain. They were not unaware that exploitation hurts. They simply ranked values differently. The smooth running of the household, the reputation of the master, the appearance of order, those won the argument before the argument started. When later moralists pushed for restraint, they framed it as good management, not mutual dignity. So, what couldn't an owner do here? The truthful answer is bleak. Almost nothing, unless his actions damaged another. Owner's property triggered a scandal big enough to stain his status, or collided with a very late, very soft moral edict. The absence of a boundary was the boundary. Still, within that absence, enslaved people carved small spaces to breathe. 3 mattered most. 1. Networks. Enslaved communities inside big households had memory. They knew who could be asked for help, who listened, who looked away. An older woman might put herself in a doorway at the right moment. A head slave might redirect a drunk guest with deference and practiced charm. It wasn't safety. It was strategy. 2. Visibility. Public behavior was everything in Rome. If an owner wanted to be seen as dignified, he staged mercy when guests watched. Enslaved people learned to move, whenever possible, into sightlines into the atrium, the courtyard, near the Lararium shrine, into places where a performance of restraint helped the owner more than indulging cruelty did. 3. Paper. Trails. This sounds cold, but it saved lives. Enslaved people counted on their value being visible. The more skilled you were, the more income you generated. The more you were a ledger line, the more likely an owner was to avoid permanent damage. That is the grim calculus of property. Profit sometimes shields the body better than pity. Occasionally dash, rarely dash an enslaved person could petition a higher power. Throw yourself at a magistrate's feet. Cry to an imperial statue. Beg a city official to intervene. These petitions had to show extremes abuse, so grotesque it risked public order. If granted, the remedy might be resale to another owner. Not freedom, survival, not justice. What about relationships within slavery? Love, partnership, children. That's Part 4's territory, but the teaser is simple. The state wrapped intimacy in a word that isn't marriage. It allowed contubernium, a domestic arrangement without legal teeth. Owners could permit it, encourage it, end it. A couple could build a life and watch it split with a signature. It's tempting to search for heroes in this story, to find the enlightened master who rejected the norms. There were kinder owners, yes. Some built reputations for generosity. Some freed loyal household members in their wills. But heroism that relies on one person's mood isn't law, it's weather. It can blow your way or turn cold without warning. If you're thinking this is unbearable, you're hearing it right. But you're also hearing why the peculiar moustache of personal savings was a lifeline. If your body was owned, money was the one thing that could start to buy it back. Not a right, not guaranteed, but a path. We'll walk that path in part 9. For now. Let's plant the second answer in our growing list. Owners could not be forced by Roman law to respect an enslaved person's bodily autonomy. The system barely recognized it. Intervention happened only when another owner's interests, public order, or a master's social image were threatened. Otherwise, silence. The rule here was the rule of power. If that leaves a knot in your stomach, keep it. We need it for what's next. Love that isn't quite marriage. Families that can be unmade by errands. Children born into status like a stamp you can't sand off. Rome gave enslaved people home-shaped rooms. It refused to call them homes. And yet, inside those rooms, people cooked, laughed, braided hair, told stories, and tried to make tomorrow kinder than today. That stubborn humanity, quiet, skilled, alert, outlived the empire that treated it like furniture. Picture a quiet corner of a Roman villa at dusk. Oil lamps hiss. A fountain coughs. In the storeroom, two people share a crust of bread and a joke so old it's practically furniture. They are not legally married. They are legally owned. And yet, for a few minutes, they feel like a family. Rome had a word for this kind of union. Contubernium, literally sharing a tent. It sounds like camping. It was actually the Roman workaround for people who were not allowed to marry. Enslaved people had no connubium, no legal right to marry, so the state invented a box to put their real relationships into. The box had no walls strong enough to stop a sale, no door that could be locked from the inside, and no paperwork that could protect tomorrow. It just said, "We see that you live together." That was it. What did contubernium not include? No dowry, no binding vows, no legal father with authority over the children, no court to hear a complaint if one partner was sold. In Roman law, the enslaved father had no official parental power. The parent the law recognized was the owner, because the owner controlled the household, the work, and the future. The most important rule sat like a stamp on every cradle. The status of the child followed the mother. If the mother was enslaved at the moment of birth, the child was enslaved. If the mother was free at that moment, the child was free, no matter who the father was. That rule became one of the only lines an owner couldn't cross. He could shout, he could threaten, he could regret, but he could not make a free woman's newborn into a slave by wish or by rage. The timing of freedom mattered more than anything. Before birth, the door to a free childhood could open. After birth, it slammed. Owners knew this. Enslaved women knew it too. That is why the months before a birth could turn into a tactical clock. A woman close to term might beg for manumission first to deliver a free baby. A generous master might delay freedom until the baby arrived, so the infant stayed property. Nothing about that dance was fair. Everything about it was calculated now. Why would owners allow contubernium at all? Two reasons, both practical. First, stability. If two people lived together and cared for each other, they were more likely to keep the household running without drama. Second, verni homeborn slaves. Children born inside the estate were considered reliable, acculturated, and often more loyal, or at least more predictable, than people bought at market. In plain language, encouraging couples could grow the workforce in-house. But this wasn't a romance story with a happy ending guaranteed. Because contubernium was only a permission, an owner could end it at will. One partner could be rented out to another house, posted to a rural farm, or sold to a buyer who wanted strong arms in Sicily. A pair could live together for 20 years, raise 3 children, and still be split apart on a Tuesday because the master needed cash on Wednesday. There was no court to say don't. Friends begged. Overseers shrugged. The cart creaked away. Did Roman moralists ever complain about splitting families? Some did, usually on the level of advice, not law. Be a good master. Don't scandalize the neighbors. Don't look cruel for sport. Occasionally, especially later in the empire, officials pinned up edicts nudging humanity. But there was no universal, well-enforced ban on sales that broke families. The market decided more than the conscience did. So how did people protect each other inside a system that didn't protect them? They made community. In big households, enslaved people built networks like scaffolding. An older woman acted as aunt to everyone. Men who worked the accounts hid small coins for a friend's future. If a sale was rumored, people swapped tasks, called in favors, tried to get a partner posted to the same outfarm. These fixes were fragile, but they were real. A community memory could save a week. Sometimes it saved a life. They used visibility. Owners cared about reputation. If a contubernium was known in the house, if the couple served guests together, if they seemed to belong, breaking them up looked ugly, not illegal, just ugly. That little bit of social pressure sometimes slowed a sale. In Rome, being seen could be a shield as well as a spotlight. They saved money. A peculium was the small, technically the nonus, practically the slave's, stash of coins that a person could accumulate over time. With it, a father might buy a child's freedom. A couple might buy one partner's. A godparent figure might buy the baby's. None of this was guaranteed. Owners could refuse. But money gave leverage where law did not. Let's step into a story. Simple on purpose.tiro is a scribe, fast hands, neat letters, good with numbers. Livia is a housemaid who can fold a tunic flat enough to look like paper. They share a bed. With the owner's permission. They share jokes with no one's permission. The house calls them a pair. The shrine to the household gods, the Lorarium, has seen them leave little offerings, side by side. They have a son. The owner names him, because the owner names everything. The child grows into the job of fetching wax tablets and trying not to sing during chores. Tyro teaches him letters on leftover wax. Livia bribes him with figs to sit still. It looks like a family because it is a family. Then the uncle in Sicily needs a manager. The owner decides Tyro will go. It makes business sense. He doesn't ask, he tells. Tyro can't refuse. Livia can't follow. The boy can't stop crying. In a free marriage, the couple could have argued their case. In contubernium, they can. Only beg dots, so they try everything. The head slave pleads for a different scribe to be sent. A cousin slave suggests renting Tyro instead of selling him, so there's a chance he comes back. Livia offers to train someone quickly to fill her post if she can be transferred. The owner listens, half bored, half irritated. He announces a compromise. Tyro will be rented to Sicily for a year. After that, we'll see. This is not justice. But inside Rome's rules, it's a win. The cart leaves. The bond stretches. It does not snapdash yet. There were other paths. Sometimes an owner freed a long-time partner, reward for service, and a flex for reputation. A freedwoman or freedman could then legally marry now with connubium, even marry the person who had owned them, but only after manumission. That was another hard line an owner couldn't cross. You couldn't make a real Roman marriage to a slave. You had to free first. Some owners did this to clean up a household relationship, to manage inheritance, or to keep their public image neat. Others never did, content with power without paperwork. What about the children when freedom happened late? If parents were freed after a child was born in slavery, that child did not magically become free. He or she needed a separate act of manumission. Later, imperial rules sometimes offered ways to fix status in special cases, but the normal road was simple and rough. If you want your child free, someone has to free the child. That is why parents hoarded peculiar, the way we hoard time. A word about the pairings Rome pretended not to see. A free woman living with an enslaved man. Society sneered. Laws and customs pushed hard against it. Owners hated it because the child of a free mother was free, which meant the owner lost a potential asset. The solution many masters preferred was ugly but legal. Keep the man a slave and pressure the woman to leave or free the man first. Then allow a marriage that looked respectable. Either way, the owner tried to shape the story to protect the ledger. And yet, despite all this control, love kept finding corners. Couples marked anniversaries in whispers. They traded tiny gifts, a dyed thread, a smooth pebble, a line of poetry copied in secret ink. Older pairs counseled younger ones. Save money, make friends, don't make enemies you don't need. Learn a skill the house can't replace easily. That wasn't romance advice. It was survival advice with a heartbeat. So, in our central question, what couldn't owners do in the family space? What can we say without lying? They couldn't make a child born to a free mother into a slave. Birth status was a legal wall even a powerful man couldn't kick down. They couldn't turn a concubinarium into a legal Roman marriage without manumission first. If a master wanted a real marriage, he had to free the partner. No freedom, no marriage, period. They couldn't erase the possibility that once free, two people could marry legally and build a recognized household. Society might gossip. The law would stand. Everything else sat on slippery ground. Sales, separations, assignments, promises kept or broken. Owners did what they wanted unless reputation, money, or rare official nudges got in the way. Inside that storm, enslaved people kept doing what humans always do. They made families. They named babies after grandmothers. They grieved. They planned. They took the tiny spaces law left open and used them like doorways. Here's the final image for tonight. Back in that storeroom, Livia has a small clay lamp, a scrap of cloth, and a rule she repeats to her son. You belong to yourself in your mind. It's not a legal truth. It's a human one. And sometimes when the time is right, when the coins are saved, when someone in power needs to look merciful, that human truth walks out of the house and onto a piece of paper stamped free. Next, we'll talk about names and identity. How a human being could be renamed like a dog. Why satire made jokes about 5 men answering to Davos. And how even freedom kept you stuck to the name of the person who once owned you. It's not pretty. It is the honest shape of Rome. A name is a handle people use to pick you up. In ancient Rome, that handle could be changed like a label on a storage jar. Start in the courtyard, again marble underfoot, water whispering from a fountain. The owner snaps his fingers and says, "You, new boy, your name's Felix, lucky." He smiles like he's done you a favor. Tomorrow, if he's in a mood, you might be Spartacus as a joke, or Spatula because someone laughed once and the joke stuck. If there are 3 men already called Cyrus or Davis household classics, he'll call you Cyrus 4 and call it organization. You don't get a vote. The house laughs. The name settles on your shoulders like dust. That's how identity begins for most enslaved people in Rome. Not with family, not with ancestry, not with a paper trail of who your grandmother was, but with whatever a powerful person finds memorable, funny, or convenient. It isn't that enslaved people never had their own names. Many did, especially if they came from Greece, Syria, Judea, Africa, Gaul. But the market could warp those names into something the buyer preferred, or level them down to a single syllable. That shouted across a courtyard. Think inventory, not intimacy. Comedy knew this. Roman plays loved a clever slave named Davis or Cyrus, who outwits a dim young master. The audience laughed because they recognized the type hand, the way a whole. Staff could share the same 2 or 3 names, so the owner never had to remember. More, Davis, the wine. 5 men step forward. One's late and gets punished. The other 4 get punished preemptively. It's a joke with a bruise. Names weren't only sound. Sometimes names were metal. Across the late empire, Archaeologists have found bronze slave collars, actual rings that sat around a person's neck with plates engraved like tiny billboards. Translated into plain language, they say things like, "Stop me if I run and return me to my master. Reward on delivery." It's a lost and found tag on a human being. If you escaped and someone grabbed you, the collar told them who would pay for your return. If you were new to the city, the collar introduced you before you spoke. Property prone to running looks like this. Branding and tattooing were tools too. Letters cut or burned into skin to mark you as a runaway or a thief, to broadcast your owner's name, to warn the world not to trust you with a coin or a chore outside. Early on, even faces could be marked. Later, emperors trying to look cleaner in the mirror band, branding the face and pushed marks to arms or legs. That tweak didn't bring dignity back. It just moved the scar where dinner guests wouldn't see it, so in the space where your identity should be your chosen name. Your story, your pastrum, wrote ownership in duplicate. A label the household could shout, and a label the world could read. The point wasn't only to control your body, it was to curate your reputation before you opened your mouth. And yet, because humans collect themselves out of scraps, still built a you. Enslaved people kept quiet names the house didn't hear. Nicknames from a mother's language. Names exchanged at night when the lamps went low. Names tied to skills. Kokyus for cook, dispensator for the one who held the keys to the money box, librarius for the copyist with fast fingers. Function names could imprison you, turn you into your task, but they also made you visible inside the estate. He's the one who can fix the accounts, people said. That's the woman who can calm the baby. Skills were identity when property tried to erase person. Let's drop back into the story we've been following. Tiro-yes. We gave our scribe a famous name on purpose, because Romans did too. Has a reputation the owner likes to rent. He can cast a column of numbers that actually adds up. He can copy a letter without turning the senator's praise into an insult by mistake. Livia, the housemaid with hands that fold tunics like origami, is the person you want if guests arrive early and chaos needs to look like calm. In the slave quarters, they each have other names. Livia's aunt calls her Little River Inn, a tongue the master never learned. Tyro's closest friend calls him Quill because ink loves him. Those names do not show up on a ledger. They live in whispers and smiles. They survive by being small. Now watch what happens when ink meets law in the opposite direction, when a person crosses out of slavery into freedom. Rome loved names that announced status the second you heard them. A freeborn Roman citizen, a man, in the strict old model, had the famous Trier, nomen a praenomen, think first name, nomen, the family name, and cognomen, originally a nickname, later a family branch marker. Enslaved people didn't have that triple armor, but when a slave was freed, the city gave them a version of it that carried a message like trumpets. This person used to belong to me. How? The freed person usually took the praenomen and nomen of the former owner, now called the patron, and kept their old slave name as the cognomen. If the owner was Marcus Tullius, the freed person might become Marcus Tullius Tiro. And yes, there was a real Marcus Tullius Tiro in history, Cicero's famous secretary, credited with shorthand. Our Tiro is fiction, but the pattern is very real. The new citizen carried the patron's names like a coat hand. That coat never came off. It opened doors, citizenship, property rights, the ability to sue and be sued. It also announced the past at every introduction. I am free, but my freedom is branded with the name of the man who owned me. Was that humiliating or protective? Both. The patron's name gave status in a world that respected famous letters more than private excellence. It also tied the freed person to obligations, respect, services, votes, favors, the sticky web of patronage. The old relationship didn't vanish. It put on a toga and learned to smile, and the next generation. That's where you glimpse a line the master couldn't reach across. Children born after manumission, born to a free mother, arrived as free. They didn't carry the legal stamp of slavery, even if the family story whispered it. A freedman's son could grow up to be a shopkeeper, a scribe, sometimes wealthy, sometimes respected, often still looked at sideways by old families who remembered who owned whom. The stain faded, but slowly, and never completely, in the eyes of snobs. In the eyes of the law, however, the child's status was a wall even a patron's pride could not knock down. What about renaming a free person? That was not a master's toy. You could mock, you could gossip, you could invent a cruel nickname that stuck in the baths, but you couldn't legally rename a free citizen the way you snapped names onto the enslaved. That was one of the hard borders of Rome's world. Status determined what you could be called, how you could be called, and who got to decide. Back to the collars and brands. Did owners ever remove the collars when a person was freed? Often, yes. The ceremony of manumission could be a public scene, a touch with a rod, a declaration before a magistrate, a registry entry. Collars came off for the performance because a freed person in a collar sends the wrong social signal. But scars stayed, and so did names that tethered a person to a house they'd left. So, in our running list of what owners couldn't do in the realm of identity, what's real and what's myth? They couldn't rename a free citizen at will. Nicknames could stick socially, but the law guarded a free person's formal identity. They couldn't brand a free person like property without consequences, which didn't stop abuse in the streets, but the law, in theory, drew a line. They couldn't stop a freed person from adopting the patron's prenomen and nomen and carrying citizenship with them. That naming formula was baked into custom and law. The patron's pride and obligations traveled together. They couldn't strip freedom from a child born to a free mother by naming tricks or household tantrums. Birth status trumped household wishes. Everything else was clay in their hands. Inside slavery, an owner could rename you, relabel you, rebrand you literally, and present you to the world as inventory. He could make 5 men into Davis so the dinner orders felt simple. He could call you lucky and never once mean it. But here's the part the system never fully understood. People collect themselves. In markets and kitchens and lamplit corners, enslaved people stitched identity from skills, friendships, private jokes, songs in 2 languages, and a savings jar under a floorboard. They built a self the ledger couldn't see, and sometimes on a day with witnesses and a magistrate and a patron eager to look merciful, that self stepped into a new name with rights attached. Not a perfect name, not a clean slate, a legal one, and legal is a kind of power. Picture the end of a long day. The house is quiet. Livia traces her boy's name on a wax tablet, the name she uses, not the one the owner shouts. Tyro returns from his year away, still wearing the same house name because the lease clock ran out and the cart brought him back. They speak their private names to each other like a password. Tomorrow, the owner's labels will still exist. The collar on the new man's neck will still flash its ugly message in the sun. But under those labels, there is a person no one got to invent. Next time, we'll follow the road that turned names into bargaining chips, skills, and school. Why owners paid to educate enslaved people. Why a Greek tutor could be priceless and still own nothing. How knowledge made you visible enough to be siphoned, valuable enough never to be free. Don, in a Roman townhouse, a boy yawns his way toward lessons, clutching a wax tablet. Behind him walks the pedagogus, not the teacher, but the guide and minder, enslaved man who knows the streets, the schedule, and every shortcut through the market. In the study, a Greek tutor waits, already grinding ink. He will teach grammar, recitation, and how not to sound like a donkey when quoting Homer. Here's the paradox. The teacher is property. The student is a citizen. The voice with the knowledge belongs to a man without legal personhood. The voice that will one day stand in court belongs to the boy who can still barely spell his own name. This is how Rome worked before lunch. Why would owners educate enslaved people? 3 blunt reasons. 1. Return on investment. A trained person earned money. A literate, librarious copyist could produce neat book rolls for sale or rent. A state cashier could manage accounts and rent collections. A skilled medicus doctor could keep an entire household on its feet and be hired out to neighbors for fees. Even cooks, especially cooks, were revenue engines. A chef who could stage a fashionable banquet made a master's reputation and income rise like bread to prestige signaling. Owning cultured labor was a status flex. A Greek rhetoric coach, a physician who quoted philosophy, a librarian who could talk about Alexandria like he'd lived there in a past life. These were living trophies. They showed guests that the household was not only rich, it was refined. 3. Flexibility and control. An educated, enslaved staff reduced dependence on outsiders. The master could keep his books in-house, heal small illnesses without sending for a stranger, and teach sons without trusting a rival's school. More skills inside the walls meant more work done with fewer leaks of money or secrets. You can see it at the market. Newly arrived people weren't just labeled by origin and age. Sellers wrote skills on tags. Bilingual, scribe, cooks, fish, weaver, midwife, barber, steady hand, trained. The more letters on your tag, the higher your price. Later, the owner added more letters with training. That training made you safer, also harder to free. Let's go back to the villa we know. Tiro. The scribe returns from his year in Sicily with sunburn, sharper math, and a head full of estate tricks. He's even more valuable, now he understands. Grain shipments, rent cycles, and which tenants lie about floods. Livia has become the household's quiet miracle. Give her chaos and a she gives you order and clean linen lined like soldiers. Their son has started to copy letters on leftover wax. Tiro slips him short lines of poetry between chores. Livia bribes him to sit still with a fig. Upstairs, the owner is doing arithmetic. Of a colder kind. With Tiro better trained, rental fees go up. He can be hired out to friends by the month. The fees flow to the owner, not to Tiro. If a neighbor needs a temporary steward Vilicus to audit a farm, Tiro goes with a written order and returns with money that never touches his own hands. This was common. Rome had whole markets of skill rental. Cooks hired for feasts, musicians for dinners, typists for correspondence, nurses for births, artisans for repairs. Owners made their money 2 ways: by the work done inside the house and by leasing people to others. Think of it like ancient staffing. Contracts were usually made with the owner. And this matters. Roman law also learned to hold a master responsible for deals an appointed agent made. If a master placed a slave as a shop manager or ship's agent, the agreements that slaves signed could bind the master. Power delegated turned into power enforced. With education came another strange shape of power: trust. A dispensator held keys to storage rooms and strong boxes. He knew where the silver was and which guest owed money. He saw the master's weak spots. This wasn't friendship, it was dangerous knowledge. Good masters respected it. Bad masters feared it and tightened the leash. And what about Greek culture? Rome had a long crush on Greece. After wars, many Greeks entered Roman households as enslaved teachers, doctors, librarians, people soaked in paideia education. A good Greek accent became a brand. Enslaved Greek tutors trained the sons of men who could send them to the market the next hour. That contradiction hummed under every lesson. Sometimes knowledge leaked beyond the lesson book. A boy learned not only how to scan a line of verse, but how the world really works, because the man holding the stylus had lived the sharp end of it. There's a famous pattern. An enslaved intellectual becomes a freed man, keeps teaching, and writes books that outlive everybody. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, enslaved while young, later freed, taught resilience from inside a system built to crush it. His line could be the motto of 1,000 quiet minds in Roman houses. You can chain my body, you don't chain my judgment. But education cut to ways. Upside, skill was a shield. Owners didn't like to injure talent. You don't burn a cook. Who can make a senator cry with a single source? You don't break the fingers that copy contracts you need in court. Value slows violence. Downside, skill was a tether. The more useful you became, the less likely the owner was to free you while you were in your prime. A mediocre worker could be swapped out. A great steward is a golden handcuff on himself. This is where Peculum, the private stash, will unpack. Deeply in part 9 quietly changes the math. Skilled enslaved people, especially those who handled money or tips, were better positioned to save. A doctor paid by grateful patients, a scribe tipped by clients for speed, a cook rewarded by a host. Drunk on compliments coins appear. Officially, every coin belongs to the master. Practically, a reputation for stealing tips stained a master more than a wine spill on a white toga. So money hid, it accumulated. It waited for a chance to buy a child's freedom, a partner's manumission, or the person's own exit. Could a master smash the jar and call it a day? Yes, owners had that power. But Rome also worshipped dignitas, public honor. To be known as the man who robbed his steward's tip box was to be known as petty. Petty invited laughter, and laughter was poison to dignity. That social pressure didn't save everyone. It saved someone. Let's eavesdrop on a lesson. The owner's son stumbles on a line of poetry. Tyro corrects him gently, guiding the accent, turning the boy's mouth from mush to meter. Livia, passing the doorway with clean linen, slows just enough to hear a favorite line land right. The boy tries again. Better, Tyro praises him not with the oily flattery free tutors use to keep clients, but with the crisp approval of a man who knows how many copies a hand can make in an hour. The boy glows. For a second, the room is only 3 people who love language, and then the owner calls. The account books are late. The glow snaps. The hierarchy returns. The man with the knowledge follows orders. The boy with the future returns to practice. What couldn't owners do in this space of skill and schooling? Not much, legally, but a few lines mattered. They couldn't unteach what they taught. Once a person became literate, counted fast, healed, well knowledge lived in a head the master didn't own. He owned the body. The mind traveled with the sail. A trained person sold to another house, took the training along. Masters learned to be careful what they invested in because value could walk away if they mismanaged it. They couldn't make an enslaved tutor into a public official or a courtroom advocate. That's Part 10's territory. An enslaved person could write the speech. He couldn't give it under his own name in the forum. Owners could ride the skill. They couldn't convert it into public honor for the enslaved. They couldn't claim state punishment for betrayal when a skilled slave used delegated authority properly. If you sent your slave as your agent and he made a contract on your behalf, the law learned to bind you. That leash pulled both ways. They couldn't stop knowledge from creating leverage. The more a household depended on a person's hands or head, the more the household arranged itself around keeping that person alive, fed, and if not happy at least not desperate. Here's the cruel loop. Owners educated enslaved people to make money and shine socially. That education produced competence, trust, and sometimes affection. Competence raised value. High value delayed freedom. Delayed freedom demanded strategies, peculiar networks. Visibility, those strategies, plus the owner's fear of scandal, kept some people alive long enough to buy or receive money. Then, once free, the same skills turned into independent livelihoods. Bookshops run by former copyists. Clinics led by former household Medici. Counting houses managed by former dispensatories. Rome filled with freedmen who kept the city humming, while old families pretended not to notice who did the real work. If you're looking for a clean moral here, Rome won't give you one. It gives you a machine that polished people into excellence and then kept them on leashes because excellence pays. It gives you a boy taught by a man the law refuses to call a person. It gives you a whisper that will not die. Teach the mind, and the mind will find a door next time we leave the classroom and walk into court. What happens when truth itself has to pass through a doorway marked torture? How could an enslaved person petition? And where did the law pretend to listen? Part 7 is the sound of a gavelander wince you can't unhear. The forum is loud before sunrise. Venters shout. Hooves clap on stone. Somewhere behind a column, a clerk with ink-stained fingers yawns awake. This is where Rome says it does justice under. Statues, in porticos, in rooms that smell like wax and sweat. If you squint, you can almost believe it. Then you see the rope and the chair. Here's the rule that bends everything we're about to talk about in Roman courts. The voice of an enslaved person wasn't trusted unless pain squeezed it out. Call it truth by torture. The logic cold, circular went like this. A slave will lie to protect a master. Therefore, the only way to get honesty is to hurt them until lying becomes harder than telling the story the judge wants to hear. It wasn't a glitch, it was procedure. So, what happens if an owner needs a witness? If the case helps the owner, the enslaved person's calm statement isn't good enough. Courts don't want a household echo. If the case is against the owner or someone else, the court may order an examination under torture to make the testimony reliable. That means the state takes the whip or the screws. Not the master, because private torture is discipline, public torture is evidence. That distinction tells you a lot about Rome. Cruelty was allowed. It just had lanes. No Socratic dialogue, no friendly cross-examination. Truth, Roman style, often entered the room screaming. Could a master simply march in with a slave to testify on his behalf, not as a normal, credible witness? The court might hear the words, but without the state's ritual of pain, they carried little weight, especially if they favored the master. The presumption wasn't innocent, it was biased. Until bled. Hold that thought. Now let's talk about the tiny door Rome kept ajar for enslaved people to petition. Against extreme abuse, there was no simple "sue your master." A slave had no standing of their own. The law treated them as an extension of an owner's will. But Rome also cared about public order, an image the city had to look civilized. So there were pressure valves. One valve was public supplication, throwing yourself at the feet of a magistrate, a governor, even the statue of the emperor, begging for intervention. This wasn't daily customer service. It was a last resort, a desperate act done in a place where eyes would see. The message wasn't "I have rights." It was "This is ugly enough to embarrass the state." What could happen if a petition landed? Not freedom. Don't dream that big on paper. But a magistrate could force the owner to sell the person to someone else if the abuse was notorious enough, or a threat to public peace. It was a way to make the problem disappear from one household and reappear, hopefully softer, in another. Rome solved cruelty like it handled trash. Remove it from sight. Another valve lived in the market. Slaves hired out by the day or month could complain to officials when temporary handlers abused them so badly it disturbed trade or reputation. The officials' men in charge of markets, streets, and order cared less about the slave's pain than about the city's face. If a cook hired for a banquet limped home bloodied, the point wasn't compassion, it was control. The handler could be fined, the owner might be warned. Keep your property in serviceable condition. Let's step back into our running story. A neighbor's silver goes missing after a dinner. Whispers drift. The copyist must have seen where the key was kept. The kitchen staff must have known the schedule. The night porter nods off. At breakfast, the owner's jaw is tight. He does the arithmetic every Roman gentleman learns early. If my house looks careless, I look careless. If my slave looks guilty, I can look decisive. Tyro is a target that isn't quite safe to hit. He's valuable. He knows the accounts. But value doesn't grant immunity. The owner announces they'll get to the bottom of it. And in Rome, the bottom is a chair with straps. Here, the system pretends to split hairs. A master can beat his people. He can brand, chain, lock, starve. But the theater of judicial torture, the official search for truth, belongs to the state. If you want the stamp of credibility, you bring the bodies to the magistrate. Your household can bruise. Only the court can bruise and call it evidence, so they go. A clerk lists names. A lictor grips a rod. The magistrate listens with the practiced face of a man who has heard 100 versions of the same day. Tyro, who keeps ledgers like other people keep secrets, asks to see the neighbor's household account of guests and servants on duty. It's a bold request from a man with no legal voice. The magistrate raises an eyebrow. The neighbor, to prove he runs a tight ship, waves permission. Tyro reads, "Numbers tell a story wine can't silence." Deliveries, door logs, a borrowed serving boy who returned late and sweaty. The ledger points its finger without needing a scream. Even here, it's not a triumph movie. Someone is still taken to the chair because Rome believes pain closes case. But Tyro's calm. Fact-shaped suggestion moves the court's gaze away from the people he cares about and onto the gap he's found. The neighbor, desperate to save face, accepts the new narrative. The magistrate nods. The day ends with fewer broken ribs than it might have. Did Tyro testify? Not in the Roman sense. He steered the scene with competence the court couldn't ignore. That's one of the few tools an enslaved expert had. Be so useful that even a biased system trips over your logic. Back to the rules. Because our series keeps a list. What couldn't owners do in this courtroom world? They couldn't turn a slave into a normal, favorable witness. If an enslaved person spoke for the master, the court treated it as tainted unless the state put the body through a spectacle of pain. Owners didn't get clean testimony from property. At best, they got evidence astorment, and even that could cut both ways. They couldn't run their own trials. Beatings at home, allowed. But if the owner wanted the aura of justice, only, the state provided it. The cords and screws that turned words into truth belonged to the magistrate's men. They couldn't easily stop a public supplication once it began. Dragging a petitioner off the steps of a temple or from the foot of an official's chair risked making the owner, not the slave, the problem. Rome hated public mess. Owners learned to keep their mess indoors. They couldn't claim betrayal when a delegated agent bound them. If a master sent a slave out as his representative running a shop, booking cargo, renting labor, the deals that slave made could legally bind the master. In court, the leash ran back to the hand that chose to put it on. They couldn't sue a slave as a person. A slave was not a legal opponent. They were an object through which to free people might fight. If there was a dispute, it was owner versus owner, merchant versus master, not master versus slave. Notice what these limits protect. Not the enslaved person's dignity, the state's monopoly on force, the market's reliability, and the master's responsibility for his own business choices. Rome wasn't trying to be kind. It was trying to be in charge. Were there cases where extreme cruelty made even hard men flinch? Yes, now and then. An owner's behavior was so lurid that neighbors complained, poets sneered, and officials worried about riots. In those moments, the government might command a sale. Get this spectacle off our streets. The slave vanished into another house. The abuser kept his seat at dinner, just with fewer eyes on him. Justice by relocation. Did Christianity, later on, soften the courts? A little in tone more than teeth. Laws and sermons scolded extremes, urged modesty, asked masters to be humane. But the machine stayed the machine. Torture persisted. Supplication remained a gamble. The better road, as always, ran through money, the peculium. Time outlasting a master, or favor earning manumission. So what should you carry out of the basilica with the echo of iron in your ears? First, Roman courts didn't consider enslaved people silent. They considered them suspect. The system built a filter that turned cruelty into procedure and called the result truth. That filter protected the state's story about itself. Rome is orderly. Rome is just. Rome keeps pain where it can see it. Second, thin as they were, petitions mattered. A slave could raise a hand where it would be seen. The remedy was rarely freedom. It was sometimes a transfer. It was always a reminder that even an owner's power lived in the shadow of the state's stage. Third, expertise was a lamp. An enslaved bookkeeper, medic, or steward could redirect a courtroom simply by knowing more than anyone else. Knowledge didn't grant a legal voice. It granted leverage, subtle, fragile, but real. On the walk home, the forum's noise feels different. You can hear the city negotiating with itself. Keep the streets calm, keep the markets moving, keep the masks straight. Tyro counts his steps and keeps his face flat. Livia, back at the villa, lights the household shrine and whispers a quick plea for a quieter tomorrow. It is not faith in justice. It's hope for less damage. Next time we leave the court for the corner of the house, where incense curls and a tiny altar watches the day. Ritual and religion, the one place where even harsh masters usually stepped back. Because in Rome, you don't pick fights with the gods who live in your kitchen before the villa wakes. A tiny flame already lives in the corner. It burns in a niche painted red, rimmed with smoke where clay figures stand watch. The Lares' household guardians, the genius, the master's spirit double, and the Pinities keepers of the pantry, because even gods in Rome answered to the kitchen. This is the Lararium, the altar of the house. Everyone belongs to it. Everyone faces it. Everyone, including the people the law calls property. Roman religion was not a Sunday appointment. It was daily maintenance. You lit incense, sprinkled wine, offered a few grains of salted flour, and asked for ordinary miracles. Let the bread rise. Keep the baby's fever low. Don't let the roof leak in a winter storm. These were not private devotions in the modern sense. They were house rituals, and because the household was a machine, everyone who made the machine run participated. Freeborn kin, freedmen, and slaves. This is where a strange limit appears inside a brutal system. In most rooms, an owner's will is the weather. At the Lararium, custom and fear of the gods push back. A master could beat, sell, rename, or rent, but to exclude the people of his house from honoring the house's gods would feel like unplugging. The home's luck, impious and Roman, bad management with supernatural consequences. So every morning, Livia sets the scene. She wipes the ledge with a damp cloth, replaces a withered garland with fresh bay, and checks that yesterday's wax drips don't smother today's flame. Tyro arrives with a cup of watered wine. The child smudged with sleep carries a pinch of salted meal. The master leads the brief prayer, because dignity likes the front row, but the hands that keep this altar alive are enslaved hands. That's not a modern kindness. It's how Rome thinks a household should breathe. What exactly happens? Little things that add up. A few drops of wine flicked with a thumb. A wisp of incense crushed between finger and thumb and laid on hot coal. A whisper of thanks to the Lares for guarding doors and thresholds. A nod to the genius of the master on his birthday or when he leaves on a journey. A quiet promise to the Pinities before big cooking days. No smoke, no spills, no spoiled sauce. On festival days, the house expands the script. For Callan's first of the month, Nones, Eids, and a carousel of public religion days that seep into private routines. Livia makes little cakes. Tyro copies neat labels for small offerings going to neighbors and clients. The doorkeeper hangs laurels. Even the dog gets a crust when the master wants the gods to notice his piety. And then, there is Saturnalia December's license and laughter. For this festival, social lines loosen. The house dresses in bright caps pillay. The master may serve his people at table as a joking inversion of roles, and punishment pauses. Is this a law with teeth? Not really. It's a norm with sharp eyes. A master who made a spectacle of cruelty during Saturnalia looked like a man picking a fistfight during a toast offensive to gods and guests. The festival didn't erase chains. It reminded everyone that even chains answer to the calendar. Okay, you ask, but was there any real protection here? Couldn't a cruel man just snuff the flame and ban prayers? Legally, he could. Practically, he risked more than sulky servants. Romans feared nephasaks that offend the sacred order. A house seen as impious gained a reputation for ill omen. Accidents, sick rooms, failed ventures. Neighbors gossiped. Clients hesitated. Prospective patrons kept walking. The city's religion was a web of expectations. Snap too many strands, and you looked like a fool who dares the gods to correct him. There were also public edges to this. Many recognize cults, think the state cults, but also popular ones, like those of ISIS in later periods, had processions and communal rites. Slaves attended with their houses, carried trays, balances, torches, visible bodies in a civic picture Rome loved. Everybody knows their place. Everybody honors the gods. The city smiles. An owner who kept his people back made his household look out of tune. He could get away with it. He just didn't want to. Image mattered more than victory in a tiny power struggle. And what about oaths? When business deals, wills, or delicate promises needed weight, people swore by gods. Even enslaved people spoke oaths in everyday life, by the lares, because words have to land somewhere. Could an owner force a slave to swear falsely? He could order it. But oaths frightened Romans. Swearing a lie at an altar was like scratching your name on lightning. Sensible masters avoided making the gods their accomplices in petty control. Not all men were sensible. Enough were to make caution its own soft boundary. Here's a corner case with teeth. Sacral manumission, freeing someone through a religious act. In parts of the Roman world, especially in Greek-speaking regions, owners could dedicate a slave to a deity at a sanctuary, creating a peculiar status, free in relation to the former master, but symbolically belonging to the god. The practical point: once freedom was tied to a temple's record, reclaiming that person wasn't just a civil wrong. It smelled like sacrilege. A former master couldn't yank them back without yanking the god's sleeve. Even in Rome proper, the ceremony of manumission often leaned on ritual scenes touched by the rod witnesses, a registrar turning freedom into a public, almost sacred fact. Paperwork can be holy when a city believes in it. There was also the matter of asylum performances, not a permanent right to hide in a temple like in some Greek cities, but a gesture with power. Fling yourself at the feet of an emperor's statue or a magistrate's chair. We met this in part 7 as petition. The setting mattered. Doing it in a sacral space or under a divine gaze made hauling you away look raw and risky. Again, not a guarantee. A deterrent. Rome preferred to solve problems without looking impious. Let's return to our people, because the gods live in details. After the scare in court, the household needs calm. The morning after, the lararium smells richer than usual. Livia set out. A honey cake the size of her hand. Tyro's boy stands straight, waiting for the moment to release his pinch of meal. The master arrives late, face carefully ordinary. He touches the incense spoon, and the smoke lifts. For half a minute, nothing of rank exists, only a family-shaped group rehearsing the city's idea of order. Then the minute ends, and rank returns. But the ritual leaves a film on the day. We did the thing that keeps the roof quiet. What couldn't owners do in this space, if we're being honest and not romantic? They couldn't make the household's god's private property. By custom, the lararium belonged to the household, not just the man in the big chair. Excluding slaves from the daily rite made you look impious and foolish, like trying to run a kitchen while banning the cook from tasting salt. They couldn't easily flaunt cruelty during major sacred times, especially Saturnalia, without staining their reputation. Not a written Phelonian audible offense against Roman taste and piety people remembered. Clients drifted. Invitations thinned. They couldn't reclaim someone freed in a religiously anchored act without courting scandal and, in some regions, sacrilege. Tie freedom to a god, and you've recruited a witness no patron wants to cross. They couldn't erase oaths and portents from the minds of the people they owned. Rome believed in signs. Forcing an enslaved person to swear a lie at an altar risked the kind of rumors that curdled dignity. Even bullies feared curses in a city that listened for them. They couldn't turn the public face of piety off without consequence. Processions, blessings, neighborhood rites, keep your house out of them, and you looked like a man who doesn't know the choreography. In Rome, that social self-harm. Do abuses still happen in sacred corners? Of course, a man who ignores human limits will ignore divine hints. But religion, because it belonged to the house and the street as much as to the master, gave enslaved people visibility and rhythm to things that blunt power's edge. Visibility, cruelties shrink near the altar, because witnesses multiply. Rhythm, even power, must bow to the calendar sometimes. Days of pause exist. Days of license arrive. Days of don't are printed in the year like knots in wood. There's another thread: burial and remembrance. Rome expected proper rites for the dead. Enslaved people formed burial clubs, saved for funerals, carved their names in soft stone. Masters could be fisted, but to deny decent burial publicly looked monstrous. A good epitaph often written by a fellow slave or freedman outlived the owner's boredom. The city read those stones. So did the gods. End where we began. The altar flame is small. It has no sword, but it makes a circle no sensible master steps across. Livia breathes on the coal to revive it. Tyro steadies the child's hand over the salt. The master speaks the words Rome wrote on every morning. In a house where almost everything is command, this is choreography, and choreography rules the room. For a few breaths, the villa is exactly what the gods like. Ordered, grateful, watchful. Next time, we count coins. Peculium, the unofficial wallet a slave could build. The money a master owned but often didn't dare steal. And the one path many people took from the altar's hope to a clerk's stamp that said free. By noon, the market is loud. Enough to shake figs off a cart. A scribe sells warm copies of a popular speech. A barber jokes louder than his razors. A money changer Argentarius counts faster than anyone can watch. In a corner, two hands meet for half a heartbeat, and a coin slides from one palm to another. No receipt, no witnesses. That coin has a name in Rome. Peculium, the private stash an enslaved person can keep. Officially, the master's property, practically the slave's lifeline. If slavery is a cage, peculium is the loose hinge. Not freedom, not a right, not safe, but movable. And sometimes, when the house looks away, enough coins move to swing a door. What is peculium in plain words? It's the unofficial wallet a slave builds out of tips, small gifts, extra wages from being hired out, or profits from a permitted side task. The law says it belongs to the master. Custom says, don't be cheap. A master who grabbed back every coin looked small, and Rome hated small. Reputation dignitas was currency. Stealing peculium was like stealing from your own aura. People noticed, clients whispered, doors cooled. Here's how a peculium forms without anyone calling it that. Tips. The cook who rescues a dinner earns a coin for the sauce. The physician who settles a child's fever earns a coin for the night you saved my sleep. The scribe who copies fast gets a coin because you spared me tomorrow. These coins are handed to the person, not the owner. Everyone pretends. The coin will of course reach the master. Everyone also knows it won't, at least not today. Hire out skilled slaves or lease to neighbors by the day or month. A neighbor's steward, pleased with good work, slips a small extra for the worker, not the owner. The owner gets the big fee. The worker keeps the tiny thank you that makes the big fee possible tomorrow, too. Little trades, with permission or with a careful smile, and no permission someone sells leftover oil. A bundle of kindling, a small mending job, a late-night haircut. Nothing grand. Just enough to make a coin appear where none existed. Clubs, burial clubs, and mutual aid groups pass a box each month. Members slip coins inside to cover funerals and emergencies. An enslaved person can be part of this circle. A master can frown. He rarely dares break the circle in public. Funerals. Our sacred theater in Rome, and you don't boo at a funeral. Now zoom into the villa we know. Livia keeps a few coins in the hem of a work tunic she no longer wears. The tunic hangs where no one borrows it. A bigger handful lives in a clay jar under a loose tile. It looks like lamp oil if someone peeks quickly. Tyro, who keeps accounts, all day, never touches the owner's money when it isn't ordered. He also never walks home from a hire route with empty hands. A grateful lender, a neat neighbor, a man who likes a tidy world, someone always presses something into his palm. The coins go to the same jar. The boy doesn't know about the jar. He knows about the box of pebbles he uses for counting practice. Sometimes the number of pebbles changes, and he doesn't know why his mother looks proud and afraid on the same day. What is the goal of a peculium? 3 wagers. Wager 1, buy freedom outright. The cleanest version is also the rarest. Agree on a price with the master, pay it over time, and receive manumission formal freedom when the pile is complete. Smart slaves get the price set in front of witnesses or on a written note, because promises shrink when the wine wears off, even. Without paper, public agreement matters. He named the price at dinner is not a contract, but it's a story that can bite if broken. Masters loved their good name the way they loved wine. Spoil either and dinner invitations vanish. Wager 2, buy freedom for someone else. Parents buy a child first. Partners buy each other when a child is safe. A godparent figure buys a baby, because the gods are watching. A household team combines coins to free the head cook, because everyone eats better when the head cook sleeps without chains. Peculium turns into strategy when it moves between hands. Wager 3, buy leverage. Short of freedom. If you can't cross the river, you make the ferry notice you. With a respectable stash, a person can say, "Send me to the city shop as your agent. I'll meet the monthly target and keep the surplus as my own." Masters liked this math. It made slaves into mini entrepreneurs for the house. The house set a quota. The person hustled above it. Both sides pretended the extra didn't exist. Everybody wins unless greed trips someone, and then coins become knives. Could a master seize the peculium? Yes. On paper, at any moment. In practice, it's a calculation. Seize it once, to stomp out insolence. And the household goes quiet in a way that costs money. Slower hands, colder smiles, the kind of accidents that happen when no one wants to make you look good. Sees it often and you get a name in the neighborhood. Stingy. People who are stingy also tend to be lonely in a city where favors are the air you breathe. There's another reason masters let peculium live. It makes discipline cheaper. A person saving for freedom polices themselves. They wake on time, learn harder skills, volunteer for ugly work that pays tips, smile at patrons they hate. Why? Because every coin is time. Every coin says closer. An owner who knows this keeps the carrot dangling and the stick visible. It is not kindness, it is management. Let's walk the path from peculium to paper. Step 1. The ask. Tyro approaches. The master, after a day the accounts glowed green. He doesn't kneel, he doesn't swagger. He speaks in the tone of a man offering a deal neither side can refuse. He asks for a price, not today's impossible number shouted in anger, but a number repeated tomorrow and next month and next winter. Without moving the goalposts, the master pretends he doesn't care. He names a figure that hurts and feels fair. Livia hears it later and counts silently on her fingers. The boy watches her lips move. Step 2. The witness. They make sure someone hears the price: an overseer, a client, the steward next door. Better still, ask the master to say it again in front of a magistrate or write a note in the house ledger. The law isn't your shield, but ink can turn memory into something like a fence. Step 3. The pay. Coins arrive in small stacks over time. The master counts. Tyro doesn't haggle. He smiles like every coin tastes like blood. Livia adds more when Saturnalia tips come. The boy stops counting pebbles and starts practicing letters because he wants to write the word free himself one day, not just hear it. Step 4. The ceremony. When the last coin hits the table, the house must step into a room where words make reality. Manumission can happen in several ways. A formal touch by a magistrate's rod with witnesses, a declaration in a will, a more private act that still leaves a trail. However it's done, the moment is public enough that backing out looks like spitting on the city. Once manumitted, the master cannot unfree you. That is one of the hard cants in a world of cans. Step 5. The after. Freedom comes with strings. The freedman or freedwoman takes the patron's name, owes respect and certain services, and cannot pretend the past never happened. But the past no longer owns the body. That line thin, legal realize the line peculium was always trying to reach. So, what couldn't owners do in the world of peculium if we're honest and careful? They couldn't undo a lawful manumission once performed. If freedom is granted in recognized form before a magistrate, properly recorded or carried out, through a valid will, the bell cannot be unrung without a scandal large enough to burn both law and reputation. They couldn't erase a publicly agreed price after it was met without consequences. Maybe not a jail cell, but a social and legal storm. Witnesses, petitions, a magistrate's glare, patrons who suddenly find their calendars full when your invitations arrive. In a city built on honor, reneging loudly is self-harm. They couldn't stop all saving. They could seize a jar, yes, but they couldn't stop tips from flowing, small trades from happening, clubs from collecting, or coins from migrating by 100 tiny paths. The machine leaks on purpose. That leak is where hope lives. They couldn't keep the profits and dodge the risks when they turned slaves into business agents. If you send your man to run a shop or book a cargo, the contracts he signs can bind. You, that rule born from Rome's love of commerce, gave enslaved experts bargaining power. Trust me, or do it yourself. They couldn't pretend the city didn't see. Peculium was a public secret, confiscated brutally, and you earn a name you can't wash off. Names in Rome are forever. Here's the hard truth alongside the hope. Peculium was never safe. Masters seized it. Robbers stole it. Fires ate it. Prices moved. Laws about how many slaves a man could free in his will, or at what age, tangled plans and clipped wings. Will. Meet those quotas in part 12. Money made paths. Money also made traps. But the jar under the tile changed how a person moved through a day. Livia said yes to an extra shift, not because she loved the house, because the jar whispered sooner. Tyro kept his temper in court, not because he feared pain, because the jar whispered closer. Even the boy learned to bite his tongue when a guest mocked his accent. The jar whispered a number only his parents knew, and numbers, in Rome, carry magic. We should say this aloud. Peculium did not make the system less cruel. It made the system predictable enough that a clever person could thread it. That threading was costly years of compliance, reputation for obedience, nights of counting coins, by touch. But sometimes the thread reached the other side of the cloth. A door opened. A name gained new pieces. A person took a breath they didn't have to give back. End with the smallest scene. Night, the villa sleeps. Livia lifts the tile. She doesn't count. She weighs the jar in her hands and knows how far they've come by feel. Tyro sits, washing ink off his fingers like he always does, and says nothing because hope breaks if you speak too loud. The boy sleeps with his mouth open, dreaming of letters that look like ladders. On the wall, the household gods pretend not to see, as if gods didn't invent the idea of quiet gifts. Next, we take this new status into the street. Citizenship, office, and the public stage, what a freed person could be. What lines still refuse them, and how a city can love your work while denying you the spotlight. Some mornings end differently than others. The magistrate's rod taps. A shoulder witnesses murmur. A clerk scratches a name into a register. A wool-cap pileus appears for the ceremonious symbol of freedom, and somebody smiles like they forgot how. A person who went to sleep as property stands up a citizen. Call him by his new old name. Marcus Tullius, Tyro. We've been expecting it. The man who made numbers behave, who copied letters until the wax shone, has bought the thin, stubborn line the city calls Libertas legal freedom. Livia squeezes his hand hard enough to make a mark. Their boy stares like the sun just moved closer. Now comes the question Rome loves even more than freedom: status. What can a freed person be in public, and what doors still don't open? What citizen unlocks and what it doesn't first? The wins, because they matter. Your body is yours. No sale, no branding, no legal beating. A patron can scold, sue, and make your life complicated, but he cannot snap his fingers and send you to Sicily. You can own property, write contracts, sue and be sued, and make a will. The law sees you as a person with a wallet, a key ring, and a future. You can marry legally connubium. If Tyro and Livia both end up free, they can make it official vows, dowry, rights, and a household the law has to recognize. You can vote, in theory. Assemblies meant something in the Republic. By Tyro's day, in the Empire, they are showpieces, But the word citizen still tastes like a right. Now the limits. Because Rome never hands you keys without engraving a reminder on the handle. High office is for the freeborn, senator, consul, magistracies with purple edges and parade days. Not for Tyro. Those titles belong to men born free, preferably into families with ancestors who already wore out the cushions in the Senate House. Local power is curated. In many towns, a freedman can't join the city council or do the kudionum that runs civic business, but he can hold other public roles that glow in the dark. More on those in a minute. Patronal strings are real. Manumission doesn't delete the old relationship, it converts it. Tyro owes obsequium respect and opere defined services to his former master, now his patron. Refuse everything and you can be hauled before a magistrate. This isn't slavery in disguise, it is debt in marble. Social snobbery lingers. A freedman in a fine cloak is still a freedman in a fine cloak. The old families see it. Some will never clap. The public stage, where freedmen shine and where they don't so, was the actual stage where a man like Tyro can be seen. One business, trade, and guilds. Freedmen dominate the practical city. Bakers, ship owners, contractors, book dealers, fullers, metal workers, bankers look up at funerary reliefs, and you'll see tools carved proudly in stone. The law blocks Tyro from the magistrate's chair. It cannot block him from opening a counting house. If he's smart, he is. He'll turn his literacy into a shop that copies contracts, drafts, letters, and keeps ledgers for people who can afford marble but not math. Two religious roles with civic shine. Here's a loophole that glows in countless towns across the empire. Freedmen serve as Severi Augustal's priests of the imperial cult. Is this politics? Not formally. Does it look like politics when you process in public, pay for festivals, dedicate statues, and get your name on inscriptions as a benefactor? Absolutely. The Augustals are social elevators disguised as piety. Tyro can't sit in the Senate. He can sponsor a banquet, fund a shrine, and be praised in stone for his generosity to the people. 3 associations and clubs, collegiate trade guilds, burial clubs, neighborhood associations. These are middle stages where freedmen organize, network, and build reputations. A good guildhead is half mayor, half uncle. He remembers who needs work, who owes a favor, and which baker's oven is reliable in a storm. For the theater of giving, Rome runs on gifts. Pay for a fountain, repair a road, dedicate a statue of... The emperor feeds the crowd on a feast. Doth this buy something? Cash rarely buys directly. Public voice. People point to your name. Clients line up. Invitations multiply. You can't legislate. You can matter. Where do the doors close? Senate and top magistracies locked. The city reserves its highest dignities for the freeborn, and even then for the few. If Tyro dreams of debating in the Curia, he'll need to do it in someone else's ear or raise a son who can stand where he couldn't. Formal ranks with birth tests. The senatorial and most of the time equestrian orders are birth. Money helps. It paints your house and feeds your clients. But certain rings are issued with the cradle. Some seating, some honors. Theaters and arenas carve the audience by status. The best rows smell like old names. Tyro sits well enough. He doesn't sit there. Power behind the curtain. Rome's loudest power wears purple. Some of its quietest power wears no color at all. Imperial freedmen, men freed by the emperor or working in the imperial household run offices. Manage correspondence, unlock treasuries, and pass files that make governors sweat. They don't hold public office, they hold the keys. History is full of such shadows and scandals about them. The lesson isn't that any freedman becomes a kingmaker. It's that access rivals rank when paper rules the world. Translate that to Tyro's street. He knows contracts better than most councilmen, and he knows who pays late. A patron who wants a problem solved quietly will ask a man like Tyro to look into the books. That's influence, not the kind that cuts ribbons, the kind that decides where the ribbon goes. The next generation, how far the ladder reaches his. The cleanest sunrise Rome offers. Children born free are freeborn. If Tyro and Livia marry after her manumission and have a child, that child arrives without the legal stamp of slavery. The snobs may sniff, the law does not. Given money, schooling, and luck, their son can aim at the equestrian or the wealth-based rank with horses on the sealand beyond. Senator, harder. Not impossible if the family's luck compounds and generations pass. But the gatekeepers at that door prefer old stories. Translation: Tyro's ceiling is lower than he deserves. His child's ceiling is higher than his. In Rome's math, that counts as progress. What the patron can't do anymore, our series keeps a list. Add these after manumission. He can't re-enslave at will. Freedom granted in recognized form is a one-way door. There are legal penalties for ingratitude, and a freedman who violently betrays a patron can be punished hard. But the old owner cannot simply snap the chain back on because his breakfast was bad. He can't beat, sell, or rename. Those tools stayed on the wrong side of the ceremony. A patron can sue. He can't smack. He can gossip, oh, he will. But he can't relabel your legal identity. He can't forbid you to own, earn, or will property. He may be entitled to certain services and sometimes a slice of your estate if you die without heirs. But your shop, your tools, your savings are yours while you live. He can't veto a lawful marriage. He may pout, he may pressure. The law recognizes your right to a household of your own. He can't silence your civil voice. Vote may be theater by now, but it's your theater. He doesn't write your lines anymore. What can he do? He can demand. The opere promised at manumission so many days of work per year, or specific services. Claim respect in court if you insult him publicly, and compete with you in the marketplace the way Romans love, by being richer, louder, and better connected. In disputes, his name might weigh more than yours. Old gravity pulls for a while. A day in the new life watch, Tyro tests the edges. He rents a tiny shop front near the baths, a high desk, a wax tablet for notes, a few shelves of forms and sample contracts. On the wall, a modest relief, a stylus, a scroll, and a balance. It says what he is without saying what he was. He registers with a collegium for scribes and accountants' dues, paid, meetings attended, gossip absorbed. He offers basic services. Draft a lease, copy a will, balance a ledger, write a letter that sounds like you're clever. Former clients from his patron circle drift in. Some want to help him because generosity is good theater. Some need him because he is fast. Some want to spy. Tyro charges all of them the same rate and keeps the door open. A few months later, he's asked to join the Aga. He knows what it means. Money out, honor in. He says yes. On festival days he walks in procession, pays for a small public meal, and sees his name carved neat and deep. He isn't a magistrate. He is someone. The boina, a little taller, sits at the high desk after hours, copying lines from a borrowed poet. Tyro corrects his meter with the smallest touch. Livia brings figs and a look that still says tomorrow out loud. The patron passes the door one afternoon, pauses, and nods in a way that says two things at once. You owe me and you make me look good. Both are true. Rome loves truths that cancel and coexist. The cleanest answer we can give so, in the space of office and public life, what couldn't owners do once they turned into patrons? They couldn't keep freedmen out of economic power shops, contracts, trade, guilds. Money listens to competence more than pedigrees on market day. They couldn't bar freedmen from all public honor. Religious roles, like the Severi Augustals, civic benefaction, and inscriptions offered genuine, visible status. They couldn't stop a freedman's child from arriving as freeborn and aiming higher. Birth status beats old grudges in the law's eyes. They couldn't reclaim bodies or names. The collar is off. The name has prenomen and nomen now, and the city recognizes the man who wears them. Everything else is friction, obligations owed. Doors that open slowly, rows in the theater that never quite call your name. But a shop bell can be louder than a Senate whisper when you need to eat. And a name carved in stone for giving bread to a crowd can last longer than a speech that died with the applause. Tomorrow we turn to spectacle, scandal, and reputation. Cruelty in private could explode in public. How the crowd's memory bit harder than the law sometimes did, and how a master's worst enemy wasn't a dagger. It was shame. Rome is a city of stages. The forum's marble is a stage. The baths are a stage. Even your front doorway is a stage, and on every stage, reputation plays the lead. The Romans had words for it: dignitas, the dignity you've banked. Fama, what the city says about you, and the stain nobody wants. You don't eat without reputation. You don't win cases without it. You don't keep clients without it. Which is why, for all the law a master held over enslaved people inside his walls, he still had to mind the audience just outside his door. Cruelty in private was common. Cruelty in public was dangerous. Rome could stomach horror. It could not stomach embarrassment. The state wanted to own the big spectacles, trials, executions, arenas. When a master turned his street into his personal theater of pain, he wasn't just hurting a body. He was stealing the state's stage. That's when the crowd began to watch. And once the crowd watched, reputation began to burn. The shame economy. Start with a rule that never needed writing down. Shame travels faster than litters. You flog a kitchen boy in the front courtyard so the neighbors learn a lesson. The neighbors learn, all right. They learn you're unsafe to be seen with. Invitations evaporate. Clients decide their cousin, less connected but less embarrassing, will represent them in court. Your name meets 1,000 mouths at the baths and loses every debate. Rome monetized virtue. Public generosity, putting on games, repairing roads, funding a feast, bought praise in stone. By the same logic, public ugliness charged interest. The censors of the old republic once had the power to mark a senator with a nota moral black, mark for living below the standards of his rank. In the empire, formal censorship faded, but the market of honor still worked. You could not be a man of consequence and a public spectacle of rage at the same time, at least not for long, not without costs that mattered. When a household becomes a riot, now picture a house across from Tyro's shop. Call the owner Sabinus, a man obsessed with order and terrified of looking weak. One evening, a serving boy breaks a platter. Sabinus drags him into the front court and ties him to a post where every passerby can see. He calls for rods, for the sake of discipline. His voice is loud enough to reach the street. At first, Rome shrugs. Boys get beaten. Plates get broken. The city has heard worse. But Sabinus doesn't stop. He makes a show of it, long, loud, theatrical, a fruit cellar on the corner stairs too long. A group of workers leaving the baths stop and mutter. One has a nephew about that age. Anagustals, one of the town's imperial cult-worthies, who paid for the last festival, recognizes the boy's mother among the laundresses and doesn't like the look on her face. The crowd thickens, the way a storm does. Names float: brute, Sevus cruel. The words stick. Someone calls a magistrate. He doesn't arrive with cavalry. He arrives with presence. Rome hates chaos more than it loves individual rights. The magistrate isn't there to save a boy's skin out of pity. He's there to keep order and to remind Sabinus that the city, not Sabinus, runs this street. He orders the punishment to stop, demands a statement, and threatens a fine or worse for a proud manner, forced sale of the victim to restore peace. Sabinus blusters. The crowd leans in. He yields, too late. The boy is cut loose. A rumor is born, and rumors are Rome's most efficient postal service. What just happened in legal terms? Nothing dramatic. A routine assertion of the state's monopoly over public spectacle and public calm. What happened in social terms? Everything. Sabinus became that man, the one who performs cruelty where Rome can see it. By dinner time, 3. Patrons have remembered they're busy next week. By morning, Sabinus learns his candidacy for a minor local honor will face stiff competition. By the next festival, his name is missing from the list of donors posted in the square, the list that tells the city who is somebody. Collective punishment and the crowd's teeth. Rome could be vicious on principle. It could also be uneasy when principle turned into spectacle. There were moments when a single crime inside a house triggered collective punishment. The entire enslaved staff threatened with execution. The law could be cold. The crowd could be hot. Protests erupted, not out of modern humanitarianism, but out of a gut sense that this looked wrong, that it smelled like a household trying to stage the state's drama. Senators argued, streets grumbled, stones flew sometimes. Even when the harsh line held, the argument itself left marks. It taught masters a lesson the city never stopped repeating. You do not turn private fear into public theater without paying for tickets you can't afford. The polite face of power masters understood the audience. That's why they learned the choreography of polite power. Public manumissions at festivals. Mercy staged before witnesses. A freed nurse honored in a funeral inscription for devotion like family. None of this was pure. But the performance limited what could be done loudly. A smart master punished inside quiet. Quick, no audience, because audiences are where reputations die. A smarter master used paper. Bring accusations to a magistrate, wrap beatings in investigation. Give pain a procedure. Procedure is a mask. Rome liked masks. They told the crowd to keep walking. Livia, Tyro, and the calculus of combat at our familiar villa. Livia knows the calendar and the windows. If discipline must happen, she nudges it away from the front court, away from feast days, away from Saturnalia. Tyro, now a freedman with a shop sign and a place among the Augustals, understands that he can do more with whispers than with shouts. When Sabinus's scandal breaks, Tyro visits a client who happens to sit with magistrates over watered wine. He doesn't accuse, he notes. He mentions the fruit seller's testimony and the laundress's weeping. He suggests a fine as a service to the city's calm. He leaves before the conversation turns into a favor, because favors in Rome are debts, and Tyro owns enough of those already. That afternoon, a boy runs past Tyro's door with a bandage and a lopsided grin. The crowd has melted. Sabina stands alone in a courtyard that smells like regret. What the law won't say out loud, but the city will. Let's turn this into our series. Favorite list. In the realm of spectacle and scandal, what couldn't? Owners do not because a statute screamed it, but because the city wouldn't let them get away with it. They couldn't hijack the state stage. Public executions, crucifixions, and investigative tortures belonged to magistrates. A master who staged punishments like a show risked fines, forced sales, and worse, becoming a byword. They couldn't turn household cruelty into neighborhood chaos without consequences. Rome prized tranquilitas, public calm. If your discipline made a street gather and growl, officials stepped in, not to hug you, but to shut you down. They couldn't keep clients and honors while being loudly cruel. You can't hold both the laurel and the lash in public. Invitations dry up, votes drift, inscriptions forget you. Reputation is a tax you pay, or it repossesses your status. They couldn't deny burial or mock sacred times in full view without earning a stink that stuck. Refuse a proper funeral for a slave who served you, or flog people during Saturnalia, and the city quietly moves its tables away from yours. They couldn't silence the rumor mill once it bit. Poets snickered, bathhouses buzzed, market women carried news like bread. Money can buy statues. It cannot buy forgetting. They couldn't avoid responsibility for chaos agents they created. If a master's public cruelty sparked a riot or a crime, the fallout fines lost cases. Hostile magistrates fell on him. In Rome, failure to manage appearances was failure to manage. Notice the pattern. The can't hear isn't always a law in a book. It's a limit enforced by audience. Rome policed its face. If your behavior smudged the city's mirror, the mirror cracked you. Mercy as a brand, and why it worked. Because the city watched. Merciful master became a brand. Manumit a loyal steward in front of witnesses. Fund the freedmen's first. Shop. Set aside money for the burial club of your household. Sponsor a festival where your former slaves serve as honored guests. Was this goodness? Sometimes. Was it strategy? Almost always. Mercy, done publicly, bought the insurance cruelty burned through. It made the crowd your co-signer. Even the law learned to use publicity as enforcement. When a magistrate forced a sale for notorious abuse, he didn't just move a person from house A to house B. He wrote a story. This city does not tolerate this noise. Masters heard the story and adjusted the volume. The last image before we turn the page, the next festival day comes. Tyro, in his Augustal's cloak, helps lead a modest procession. Incense, music, bread for the crowd. Livia watches from the steps, with the boy who is just old enough to hold a basket of tiny cakes and not eat them all. Sabanis appears at the edge, smaller than he was a month ago, his name missing from the donors board. He claps at the right places. He smiles too hard. Everyone sees it. That's the point. Rome is reminding him and all the men like him that the city owns the applause. We've measured every limit the audience could impose. For the final part, we return to the narrowest door in this whole world, the legal door out. And its afterlife. Quotas, age, rules, strings attached, and why? Even hemmed in by algorithms of control. The path to free stayed open, just enough to keep hope from going on strike. A city clerk dips his reed in ink. A wax tablet lies open like a mouth about to say yes. In front of him stand three people who have learned to breathe without making noise. Tyro, now a freedman with a shop. Livia, free at last, and wearing a simple ring she keeps touching as if it might vanish. And Maruse, the best cook in a 10-block radius and still owned by a man who likes applause more than honesty. Today's plan is simple and risky. The Roman way by Maris's life out of a ledger and into a name. Rome had a word for that move. Manumission, the hand that sends you away from the master's legal power. The city loved the ceremony so much it carved it into different shapes. It also loved control so much it laced those shapes with limits. Let's lay the table neatly. There were ways out, and there were walls along those ways. The ways out, one in front of a magistrate, manumitio vendista, the classic stage piece. A magistrate's assistant touches the slave with a little wand, the vindicta. The master declares consent, witnesses stand by, and a clerk records it. The drama matters. Rome believes in public facts. Once written, they don't like to be unwritten. To buy the census, manumitio cens. Enroll the person as a citizen at the census. Powerful in the Republic, rarer later. Still, the idea sings. Numbers make you real. Point 3, by will manumissio, testamento. The master dies. The will is opened. Names unfurl like sailcloth. If your name is there, and the rest of the will obeys the rules. You stand up free when the lawyers finish clearing their throats. For the informal ways, inter amicos, per epistulum, at the dinner table. A declaration before friends, a letter set out loud. A master seating a favored slave at his table as an equal and saying, from this day, these felt good and sometimes worked with strings. Often they made you a quasi-free person with Latin-style status and clipped rights. Will come to that shadow. Rome loves thee almost as much as the yes. The walls on the road once Rome saw how many people were walking through the door. It started building guardrails. Augustus's quota on freeing by will lex fufia canenia. The problem from the state's view. Dying men freeing too many people at once. Scrambling fortunes. Swelling the citizen rolls. The fix. A sliding cap. Small owners could free more, big owners less. In effect, if you had a handful of slaves, you might free all or half by will. Once your household got larger, you'd be limited to a third, then a quarter. And for the very rich, even a fifth, and never more than a set maximum number overall. The math turned a funeral into a ration line. Harsher than hunger because the hungry could at least hope tomorrow. Age rules. And character tests. Lex Aelia Sentia. Another Augustan-era wall. The master had to be 20 plus 2 free. The slave had to be 30 to become a full citizen. Less a special council approved an exception for good cause. If you'd been branded or punished for serious offenses, you could be manumitted into a shadow status with fewer rights, the kind of free that isn't welcome near Rome's city line. Translation: the state policed the who and the when, not just the how many. Fraud checks. Free someone to cheat your creditors. The law could void that manumission. Rome protects money with more energy than it protects mercy. That has not changed in any century. Paper trick, freedom, the Latini. Those informal manumissions often produced a halfway status Latin, freedom think, resident with rights, but not a full citizen. You could live as free, make contracts, work, marry, but you might be blocked from writing a will, and your estate could default to your patron. When you died, a life enlarged, but still on a leash. Later emperors fiddled with these categories. Much later, Justinian bulldozed a lot of them. In Tyro's day, the maze still stood. Now, how do these rules feel when you're the one with a name on the line? Well, like a weather report picture, a will being read in a courtyard. Marble echoes, guests pretend to be solemn. A lawyer reads, and every enslaved ear goes sharp as a knife blade. The dead man has named names to be freed. Murmurs, but he also owned many people and loved to show off. Here comes the quota. The lawyer does fraction math out loud. Some names are allowed. Some are trimmed by the law like vines. A girl who thought today was her day learns it is not. She doesn't cry because Rome hates public crying from the wrong mouths. She does not go back to being a person. She goes back to being a plan. That is what a quota feels like. An arithmetic storm. The council with the raised eyebrow now meet the other Walder age rule. Livia's nephew is 26 and brilliant with accounts. His master finally agrees to free him, but the rule says 30 is the magic number for full citizenship. Can they do it anyway? Yes. If a council of men with official faces agrees, there's good cause. What counts as good? Saving a life, unusual merit, the kind of service that looks nice in a speech. They don't hand these out like figs. You build a portfolio of praise, and you carry it into the room. Our three, Tiro, Livia, and Maruza, playing a different game today. Maruz is over 30, the master over 20. No counsel needed. They will use the cleanest road. Magistrate. Rod, witnesses, ink dot strings. After the door what happens after the wand taps and the clerk writes. You become a freedman, freedwoman, libertus. Liberta of your former owner, now your patron. You owe respect obsequium and specific services. Opere agreed at manumission so many days of help each year. Or a defined task. Dodge them and your patron can haul you to court. Obey them and people call it duty. Same steps, different music. You take your patron's prenomen and nomen and keep your old name as a cognomen. Your name announces both your new status and your old story every time someone says it. It is pride and reminder in one breath. You can own, contract, marry, and if fully free, write a will. If you were freed by one of the halfway routes, some of those rights shrink. The maze again. Your children, born after your freedom, and marriage, are freeborn. This is a law even pride can't crush. It is the brightest sentence Rome ever wrote. What owners couldn't do, even when they wanted to, our series keeps a ledger of limits. Here's the last, written with a blunt stylus. They couldn't unring a proper man. Once the magistrate's ceremony or a valid will freed you. A patron couldn't legally re-enslave you because he changed his mind or because dinner was late. He could make life bitter. He could not take the status back. They couldn't blow past the testamentary quotas. A will that tried to free more than the legal fraction got trimmed by the law, not interpreted generously. Arithmetic had authority. They couldn't free the underage and call it full citizenship without using the council door. If a master wanted the halo of freeing a 26-year-old into full citizenship, he brought a case and held his breath. With the rest of the room, they couldn't manumit to defraud creditors and expect the city to clap. The law sniffed that trick and tore up the ribbon. They couldn't turn an informal yes into full rights by sheer swagger. If you freed inter amicos without form, you made a Latin, not a citizen, unless other steps followed. Swagger is not a statute. They couldn't stop a freed person's child born after freedom to a free mother from being freeborn, no speech. no seal, no stingy frown could change that. Those are the rails that kept the door narrow and real at the same time. A quiet ceremony. A loud result, back to the office. The magistrate glances at the parties, checks ages and words, nods to the assistant. The little wand touches Maris's shoulder. The master performing mercy like a man who enjoys audiences speaks the formula. The clerk writes, "It takes 2 minutes to change a life, and 10 years to have the coins and courage ready. Name." The clerk asks, "Already writing the patron's prenomen and nomen, Maruse," he says, "and then the new pieces that tie him to the old house forever." He signs with a mark he practiced on scraps in the kitchen. Livia exhales. Tyro looks at the door as if expecting the city to kick it back open. It does not. They will celebrate at the Lararium and in the street. Tyro will commission a tiny relief for Maris's future shop. A knife, a pan, a wreath of laurel. Maruse will owe his former master a few opere days each year. He will grumble, and he will show up on time, and he will go home free. The strings are there. So is the sky. The long arc centuries turn. Emperors change. Laws shift. Eventually, a lawgiver named Justinian will blow away part of the maze, scrap some of the old quotas and categories, and fold more paths to full citizenship into one clearer road. But that is long after our people are names on stones. In their years, the rules were tighter. The door still opened. It opened often enough to change neighborhoods, guilds, and the faces walking in processions. What hope learned to do hope in. Rome learned Roman habits. It learned to budget peculium jars under tiles.